Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the show where I rank all of the dungeons in the Zelda series. And Corey Richmond, what's going on?
I'm here.
We're
I'm
here.
ready for the end of this beautiful game.
We're at the grand finale of Wind Waker. You can't tell because we're just audio, but it's a celebration.
It is.
We're partying here.
Yes, we are. I just had a cookie. That's how much we're celebrating.
We had a cookie. I drank a strawberries and cream Dr. Pepper, and now I'm having some water. And we're letting loose. I don't got notes for the dungeon here. We're just I don't know. We're just gonna let it all flow. You know
Vibes
what I mean?
only, no notes.
No, it's been a great long season. So before we even talk about stuff, I want to thank everyone who's followed along, and you, Corey, who have been a great co-host going through Wind Waker, and taking a finer look at all things, at almost every aspect of the game. We didn't talk about figurines or anything like that.
Stay tuned for the figurines episode.
Actually, you know what's funny? One thing I want to mention that we never talked about in any of our dungeons, and they're in dungeons, we never talked about Tingle statues.
The Tingle statues, yeah. I collected all of them this time around, too.
Yeah, see, I did them when we did the Zelda Warfare for it. Mm-hmm. That was actually the first time I, knew about them.
This was also the first time I knew about them. This is the first time I did them.
I think because I was like, oh, what about the Tingle statues? And we had already, done the episode, and you were... Right? Am I wrong about that, or... I don't remember.
I think I told you at one point that I got some of them.
Okay. Well, whatever. They would not affect a single ranking of any of my dungeons, though they're a nice extra collectible in there. But yeah, we're here. We're at the end. Again, it's been a longer season because it's just been, I mean, we're running up really close to actually recording this and the release date of it compared to when we started. So these just took longer to produce, but it was well worth it. I think it was really fun to go back and really show off all aspects of the game, not just the dungeons, but the story,
I agree. I loved it. And hats off to you, because the editing and putting together the videos, I'm sure that took a bunch of work, and they all turned out awesome. So
thank you. Yeah, it's been really fun, and it's been a nice challenge in editing. I'm not going to reveal it yet, but just as a tease, we are going to change things up for the next season. So before we get there, though, I don't reveal anything, because I actually want to try to make an episode for the next season in the format before I actually say what it is, in case I fail horribly at it. But it's going to be a lot easier theoretically, right?
Yeah. Can we spoil that my beautiful voice isn't going anywhere quite just yet?
Corey will be there. Yeah, we should change the name to the Dungeon Dive.
The Dungeon Dive. Gooey and Friends Dungeon Dive.
So yes, please stick around for the next season. We'll take a little break and test a few things out, see how it goes. We're gonna talk about Minish Cap. I don't know if I said that, but I think that's the next. We're doing the single player games. People always ask me if I'm doing any of the multiplayer games, but we're just gonna stick with the single player games, because that's what I want to do. So yeah, Minish Cap is next. I'm excited to hook up my Switch and play it on that. Throw this Wii U in the trash. No, not really. But
until Twilight Princess.
Oh yeah, well that's a whole nother story. Yeah. But anyway, excited to get to that. I'm thinking, like I said, I'm gonna take a little break. I'll probably do another little Q&A also. You know how I've done some between seasons.
Yes.
So actually, if people, instead of making a video where I announce it, just go down in the comments of this video and leave a question for a future Q&A, as well as what you think of this video. But and I'll draw from there. How about that? Yeah, otherwise, let's actually talk about this. Usually in the lead up, I'll kind of give like the story summation, but we kind of did all that in the last one, since it was pretty much story based. But we're here. Oh, yeah. We've arrived. We've shattered the barrier surrounding Hyrule Castle, and like I said, we took that path that leads right up to the cave, which is at the foot of Ganon's Tower. Woohoo! I guess we can talk about this now, but I always found just the entrance of this dungeon strange. I don't know if that... Do you feel that way, or is it fine? I always find it weird that you in the other Ganon's Tower / castles, you go up to it and there's like a big epic cutscene. Here you kind of shatter the glass, but then you do this whole pathway and you never really get up to Ganon's Tower and you're like, whoa, look at Ganon's Tower. It's always like off in the distance until you're on top of it later at the end, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. It just feels to me, it's like, it's not grandiose. It feels like you're entering a cave and then all of a sudden you're just in it. You're just in the dungeon. Yeah. Apparently at the bottom of the tower. That did, even back in the day, that always kind of confused me as a kid. I probably walked through the cave entrance and was like, wait a minute, I'm not ready for this. No.
Right, yeah. It does, though, it's sort of like in the actual structure of the dungeon, it like it makes sense, you know? Like, you start off in, like, a cave-like area, and then it, like, kind of transitions into, like, the foot of a tower. But, yeah, I'm already, just in terms of, like, the epicness of entering it, it's a bit strange. I always just, this really doesn't affect the dungeon, but I always got the path leading up to it, I always found like kind of weird, and it adds to me of this feeling of like, you know, I didn't expect there to be a big Hyrule field, but it seems strange. Like, what was this, how it was intended, you know, or did they want to do more with this? I don't know, you know.
It would have been nice if they did more. I actually do like the path because I like the feeling of, like, you know, walking where no one has walked for however long, ever since this was flooded.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I like that it's like, oh, I'm walking old Hyrule or whatever, but it is just that path, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I like it. Like, I like the idea of it, the feel of it, but yeah, some of the execution isn't as good, I don't think. So this dungeon, I feel like it splits up, you know, pretty evenly into 3 parts, so the first part where you're more in the cave, we have this door that prevents us from progressing, and it's similar in vein to like Ganon's castle from Ocarina of Time, where to open the door, we have to take 4 different paths that are each reminiscent of like the 4 major dungeons outside of the Tower of the Gods. Mm-hmm. And they have a little room in between, essentially a rematch of the boss fight of their respective dungeons. What did you think of this, about, you know, going back and like doing basically a boss rush of each of the bosses?
Yeah, this is something we've like... Is this the first time where that's been the main objective, is like you need to beat these old bosses to move forward? Because I know there have been ones where like Turtle Rock, we've faced some of the older enemies, and like the other Ganon's Tower, A Link to the Past, I know you fight the Light World bosses.
Yes, that's what I was gonna bring up, is that the A Link to the Past one, I feel like, is the closest comparison that I could draw. Yeah.
This is something that isn't necessarily going away. It's going to come back in later Zelda games. And I don't think it's inherently a bad thing, but I think, especially in tandem with the puzzle rooms leading up to these boss rematches, I think this is pretty weak, in my opinion. This is probably my least favorite part of the dungeon. And it's like, I don't mind refighting the bosses, because I do think it's fun that they have distorted themes and it's in black and white.
That's cool, yeah.
And like, I do like that they try and make it like, oh, you don't have the items that you would have had at this. Or like, you know, you've gotten all these items, and normally it's like, okay, test your strength, maybe it's a little bit harder, but instead it's like they take away all of the items that you have now and give you what items you would have had then when you first faced the boss, and then the boss isn't any harder at all. And that was one
I would say they're all easier, I think.
Yeah, that's the problem, because like you have the Master Sword doesn't get reversed, so your sword is doing more damage actually to the bosses. So it is actually just an easier version of the fight. And
yeah,
that's not the right way to do this, I don't think.
I pretty much 100% agree with you. And the reason there's a lot of ways I think you could do it and it would be cool. And it didn't necessarily have to be this, but the Link to the Past comparison I thought of, because in that you run into the Light World bosses, but maybe it's just because of like they're not, like you can put them in just like any room or whatever. I guess you could do that here. Not necessarily, because the Wind Waker rooms have to be massive to hold some of these bosses. But you know what I mean? Like it feels like it feels cool, like you're just running across them in the dungeon, and it's like now they're almost like a regular enemy, and like I don't know why here, because it just has it's presented as such a big set piece that I actually find it kind of underwhelming. You know what I mean?
No, I agree. It's with the other ones, it's like they're kind of just obstacles in your path, and it feels like a bigger deal because it's like this was a full boss before, and now you're just putting it in a room on my path, like without some big grandiose thing. Like that's a lot to tackle. And in addition to that, all of those bosses are made harder too. Like the Armos Knights, you fight on ice. The why can't I think of it?
Moldorm?
Yes, Moldorm. Classic Moldorm. He's in a different shaped arena. All three of them are changed. And it's not, it's the fact that the fights are easier in this is just kind of pretty upsetting. And I think this is also the rooms leading up to those rematches. They do that thing which, like, we've kind of seen it before this, and this isn't the first time I'm gonna make this comparison, but this reminded me a little bit of Ocarina of Time, Ganon's Castle, where you have to go into each medallion's section, and it's like themed based on like a certain part of a certain dungeon or a certain area or whatever. And we've had, you and I have both had our gripes with the puzzles in Ganon's Castle in those sections, but I feel like at least they were kind of trying to do something somewhat original or somewhat different, because some of these rooms feel like complete nothing rooms to me. Like I think the Earth Temple one is pretty cool because it's just like a long hallway with a bunch of coffins and some easy switch puzzles, but I think it's interesting enough. And I like the Forbidden Woods themed one too, because that one's a little bit more of like a platforming challenge. But ones like the Dragon Roost themed one, like, what is even the intended solution there? Because it's just like four grappling hook points, and the way that I always do it is I grappling hook to one and then climb all the way up and get on top of it, and then grappling hook to the next one and do the same thing, and just keep going until I can Deku Leaf over to the ledge. Is that the intended solution, or is there?
It's interesting. I think normally we would like praise something if it was like, oh, there's different ways to do it or whatever, but like it never feels satisfying doing that puzzle.
That's what I mean. I'm
always like,
I don't know if that's the intended solution, but if it's not, it didn't feel right. It felt like there should have been a cool puzzle there or something.
But it doesn't feel like, sometimes it doesn't feel right in a like, wow, I can't believe that worked way. And this is like, okay, that's what you wanted me to do?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. It's almost an ineffable thing, but it's a little annoying, yeah. I think all of them, like some of them at their best, like they at least have a cool-ish setting type situation. But yeah, we obviously crapped on some of the ones in Ocarina of Time. I think just by virtue that there's more in Ocarina of Time, like there just happens to be like, if they were all like the light medallion one, like then I would be like more negative on it. But there's some like at least memorable ones, and memorable
Yeah.
not just for being really stupid. You know what I mean? Like, even if they're not that tough of a challenge, like they're kind of they're like memorable and cool, I think, you know.
It's kind of a shame because, like, when we were talking about Ganon's castle, I distinctly remember being like, what's with all the silver rupees? Like, why are we doing this in the final dungeon? And it's kind of sad because here I would have taken silver rupees. Like, I would have rather had that, you know?
Yeah, that does make it, at least in some of the rooms, it makes it feel like like in the fire temple room, I think of it. Yeah, you're just collecting silver rupees, but it does feel like, hey, we're testing your fire durability once more, and it's a little tricky.
Sure,
None of them in the Wind Waker, I don't know, I'll goof them up sometimes, but they don't really feel like they're testing me. They just feel like...
No.
There's something about this whole section all around that feels like... It just feels like you're giving me some busy work to do, you know what I mean?
I agree, yeah. And it's like...
Okay.
It's an interesting... I think in concept it's cool, and it can be done well. Definitely not done well here, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, totally. Once you beat all 4 bosses, though, it unlocks kind of the next section of the dungeon. And they give you, if you need it, they give you sort of a break here. There's like a little puzzle that you can do to find the portal in which Ganondorf used to escape to the surface, which is kind of a cool little detail. Like, King of Red Lion shows up and he's like, oh, this is how he did it, huh?
This is how he got up there. Yeah, I actually had that in my notes, too. I think that's a really cool little lore detail. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like a little secret passage.
I also wanted to point out, too, I think this is a quintessential, way over hinted at puzzle. Because, like, you go in the one room, and you go in the other room that has the torches lit properly, or the lights lit properly, or whatever. And, like, the King of Red Lions gives you a hint. And I think if they had just left it at that with his hint, it would have been perfect. Because he just says, hey, pay attention to your surroundings. Everything in this room, the positioning, the number of things, just pay attention to it. Because you're going to have to do something in the other room. Which, like, even that's pretty straightforward, but it's like, okay, fine, he's helping me, this makes sense. But then you get into the other room, and one by one, the camera pans up to each thing in order, like each switch in order
too.
It's like,
it's not even like that, like, if it, like, even tilted up, you know, it's like, ooh, candles. But no, it's like 1, 2,
that's super
3,
over the top.
4. Yeah, but whatever. It's just to make a way out of the dungeon.
That's
I don't know.
Also, how did King of Red Lions?
It's cool.
How did he get in? Where?
It's so funny. He just shows up. He's like,
Oh yeah, just come here from time to time.
So this is how we did it. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. You know what it is.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we have this puzzle here now. There's like a tablet that's like, what, I don't even know the quote, but it's like, the hilt of my soldiers point towards the truth. I don't know.
Something like that.
We got a door that we can't get past, so all we can do is...
Well, first you gotta jump down the pit.
Yeah, jump down in a pit, which I feel like some people might not figure out. You know, you almost got to take a leap of faith. But I feel like it's worth trying. It's actually kind of cool now that I think about it. It's like one of the only, like, sort of, kind of, almost obtuse things in the game, you know?
Yeah, it is. I know I've gotten stuck on this in the past, and it's like, but going back to the Ganon's Castle thing, it's like, there are certain parts of each dungeons that I think one does better than the other, and it's like, for right now, that whole themed part, huge edge to Ocarina of Time, everything for this next section, like, from the jump into the pit onwards, I think is super cool.
Okay, well, let's talk about it. The first thing we encounter, it's a Phantom Ganon rematch, and the hint, and actually, the fight itself kind of incorporates sort of the Forest Temple Ocarina of Time Poe thing where there's like multiple copies of him. Becomes like a trope in Zelda after this, but he pops up and you gotta find the real one, and it kind of mixes in elements of the previous battle with him too, where you're playing tennis and things like that. But it's an okay fight. It's actually like it's that it's unique, you know what I mean? Because we fought a million Dark Nuts at this point, and so it's cool to like fight him as like sort of a sub sort of mini boss type thing here. Sure. It's kind of a memorable segment all around, really. I really like it. I think this is my favorite version of Phantom Ganon, like in general. And I think, you know, seeing him the one time in Forsaken Fortress and having that one showdown with him when then he disappears, it feels cool because now it's like you're in his domain and like this is the showdown. It's like the final 1v1 against him, and just that sword maze, I think that's a super cool idea. And this whole section too is like everything up until this point has kind of felt either intentionally iterative of other dungeons you've been in the past, or it's just been like a generic cave. And then once you get down here, the architecture starts looking a little different. You got huge rooms. The floors have these, you know, cool patterns and stuff. Everything's a little spooky. The theme changes a little bit. And it feels a little bit kind of like Bizarro World. And this is also something that Zelda dungeons like to do a lot. Or not even just like in late Zelda game dungeons. A lot of times there's like a multiple room maze puzzle thing where it's like you have to find your way through and find your way out. And I think this is one of the coolest methods of doing it, is like defeating the doppelgangers and then following the way that the hilt points. That's just really creative, I think. Yeah, I think it's pretty cute. It reminds me of it has similar, like, you see kind of stuff come back where like Lost Woods and A Link Between Worlds. It's a little different, but it's like it's sort of you know, like a cute little hint to sort of find your way through. I think actually like that's actually something that's like kind of a classic Zelda thing almost, at least at this point. Yeah, but it's in a unique way. Like I think of like the Lost Woods and Ocarina of Time, where it's like listen to find your way, and that's just something. It is something kind of unique, but it is such a classic Zelda thing of like just giving you like, you know, a little hint like that, and you have to, you know, figure out, do I go up, down, left, right, you know? Yeah, even going back to the original, you know, to get to the fifth dungeon, you got to go up and up and up and up, and you get that hint from an old lady. And getting through the Lost Woods there, it's like you got to go up and left and down and left. And then it's like it's the same thing as like it feels very similar to the Windfish's Egg, except the difference is instead of having like a preset path, you have to fight a little mini boss each room, and then that results in your next arrow forward, basically. Yeah, it's such a little detail, but the sword, I think, is like the sword falling down. Is that just... Yeah. I like how it ends. Like, I like this whole thing, because you get back to that door that is like... It's almost like, is this a door? But now you've got that sword, and it, you know, smashes a way through. So that's pretty cool. And you get the light arrows here, right? I love that. Yeah, you do. That's actually, that was one of the things I was going to say, is the coolest kind of like resolution of this whole little section is that you're fighting the real Phantom Ganon, and it feels like you're just doing the same thing, and then you get the light arrows. And within one shot, you take one shot at him, the music cuts, and he just gets absolutely destroyed. And that's always been so jarring to me, because like you shoot him and he has a little spasm and then just disappears from existence. And I'm just, every time I do that, I'm like, what in the world did I just get? These yes, light arrows feel like such powerful. They feel almost like what ancient arrows feel like in Breath of the Wild, where it's like, oh, for sure, you're not even killing an enemy, you're just like yeeting them from existence.
You get the arrows, you beat Phantom Ganon, and then you get the sword to break the door.
That is cool too. So like they kind of the 1-2 punch there at the end, I think, is very satisfying.
That's another one where like I don't know how many people would immediately think to pick up the sword and swing it or throw it at that door, but I think that's just another cool little, like, we've known from the beginning of Forsaken Fortress that we can pick up enemies' weapons, and to actually like incorporate that into a puzzle in the dungeon in this kind of obscure way is, I think, pretty cool.
In this last section, if not anything, it's kind of we have just kind of a staircase leading up to the final boss room, and they kind of just let you go ham with these light arrows, and it's filled with dark nuts and things like that, and you can just kind of destroy them all, wreck them with these arrows right away.
Kind of a similar thing to, like, again, Ocarina of Time, Ganon's Castle, where it's like after you get past the main portion of the dungeon, it's just like a bunch of staircases and then like mini boss fights, a bunch of staircases, then mini boss fights, kind of building up, doing that upwards ascent thing. But this is much more like you have the light arrows, so at the end you get to the top and there are like 3 dark nuts, and it's just child's play because you can just destroy them, you know?
I both like appreciate that, and I think it's like satisfying. For me personally, I think just the pacing of the Ganon's Tower Ocarina of Time, where it's like it's a different thing. It's hard to compare in that you're not necessarily like tanking through them all. You know, it's meant to like build tension. Yeah. Whereas like actually this time around, I was like, I just wanted to see. I'm like, do I have to kill these guys? And I just ran past them all. And then I got to the top and I was like, oh, nope, the door is locked. So then it was like, okay, now I go back and pick them all off. And it does, like, while it does have that sort of like, yeah, I'm a beast, I can kill them all. It doesn't, for me, it's like, it kind of doesn't have the, I actually think if you reversed it with the Phantom Ganon part, maybe it would have been more effective to me. But then I guess you don't get that satisfaction of using light arrows, so I don't know.
I know what you mean, though. Even, like, as I kind of go back and forth between, like, because it is satisfying, and I think that's what they want you to feel like. I think they're trying to present you with all these enemies with the intention of you being like, I can just, you know, rip through them now. But it has always kind of felt a little bit weird pacing-wise to me, because it's like, you have the puzzle heavy part, and then you have like the longer Phantom Ganon part, which is really cool, and then it's like the ascent part, which should be building up to it, is the quickest one. So it's kind of like, it's almost counterintuitive, but it's accomplishing what it's trying to do in a way too. So I don't know.
I'm split on it. I think it has its pros and its cons, and it's trying to like reference that, but I think it's also trying to accomplish a different thing at the same time. So we get up into the room, and before there's any battle or anything, we get another little, I like this little scene with Ganondorf, and Zelda's there. He's got Zelda, and he's sort of like, he's like seeing into her dreams. He says he's being a little mysterious. I like, he's like, I see oceans in her dreams. It's really moody. And then he like, he morphs into like the monster, which is pretty cool. What do you think about this scene?
I mean, this section, we're getting to a sequence in this game that arguably has in my opinion, some of the coolest dialogue in the whole series. Like the stuff that Ganondorf says about like, all the islands and people are all just leaves on a forgotten pool. And like your gods, you think your gods saved you? Don't you see your gods destroyed you or something? And it's like, oh my gosh.
A lot of the stuff I love this story, and we'll talk about it even more. But the thing I like about it actually is that it's so simply put, I think. And that's what I've loved about Ocarina of Time and Link's Awakening. Whereas we don't really get a lot of cutscenes with Ganondorf, but like there are all these little ones that just they like hit the point home of the game in very few words. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so in this section, I love this where, and we'll talk about it a little more, but they're setting up this idea, like the difference between the world, like even this little thing implies so much. I think about like he's in her dreams, she just sees oceans and everything, and it's kind of establishing like the different ways that they envision their world, because their worlds are entirely different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And I think we'll get to it, as you're saying, when we get to like the very end, but this is when we start really getting a deeper look into this villain. And Wind Waker Ganondorf is kind of famous for having some really cool dialogue and being like pretty well beloved. And it's just like the rest of the game, it's been like, this is Ganondorf, he's the bad guy. He was the bad guy before. He's been looking for the pointy-eared girls. He's trying to take over, blah blah blah. All that evil guy stuff, you know. And in direct comparison to something like Ocarina of Time, where this would be the moment where you get up to Ganondorf playing the organ, and he has an awesome monologue there too, but even in that, it feels very much like, I'm the big, bad, scary, most evil guy, and I'm gonna take you down. And this, it feels like he's doing a little bit more like explaining or hinting about things that are going on in his mind, at least.
What I would say is there's suggestions of nuance.
Yeah.
I think people, maybe this is fine, but I think people sometimes overcorrect or blow it out of proportion, that this is like extremely like deep, and it's like, maybe it is. What I like about it though is that it's all implied, you know what I mean? Or some things are outright said, but it's like you can almost kind of picture or like think of how Ganondorf feels, and a lot of people imprint a lot of things onto it that I think is cool, you know what I mean? But I love it. This idea of, or even another thing, I actually like the vagueness somewhat. I think there's vagueness in here, ambiguity in a way that's like, but it's subtle. Well, it's not subtle when he screams, "Your gods destroy you," but just this idea of like,
even that though, it's like,
well, it does like, make you think a little bit, like.
Exactly. That's what I mean. It's like, because in all that we've heard about this is like, the gods did this to save Hyrule, and that's why the world is the way it is now. And it's like, clearly not everyone thinks that was a good thing. Well, granted, he is literally the bad guy that that they were doing it to, but like, it's just interesting.
Well, but you can assume that other people perished in this, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So it's, I don't know, maybe it's kind of subtle, it's like not subtle, but like stated almost, that like, they like they probably killed a lot of people doing this, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with what you're saying. Like, I think a lot of people do, and we'll get to it when we get to the next big monologue, but like, I do think a lot of people kind of make it a little bit more than it is, but I also think that's kind of a hallmark of just good storytelling, is that ambiguity. It's like intentionally leaving gaps for the player or viewer or whatever to fill in themselves. Like, that's so much more satisfying, in my opinion, than just being given fully being given something, you know, spoon-fed to you.
I think a good example of something I like, but it's also like, there's obviously things that I think tackle these things and more, just, you know, there's just more to it, and other things is that line about your gods destroyed you. It makes me think of, actually, like, the ambiguity of that. It's not just in the morality, but like what actually went down there actually makes me think of the way, like, it kind of how I like the writing in like A Link to the Past, of how like kind of vague sometimes it is, and it you know, oftentimes they'll refer to the Triforce as the golden power and this sort of thing. And there's sort of this like where like it's not all knowable. Like you can't really know about all of it. And just like, yeah, there's not big explain or cutscenes in here, it's just sort of like it's actually, in fact, the less you know about it, the more intriguing it makes it. And there's something to that about the inscrutable, I think, the slightly inscrutable nature of the gods, like I can imagine a person like, and that's something that's, I think, true for certain people in real life. Like when people have struggles in real life of like faith, of like, what would they imagine, like, people will say like, oh, if there's a god, like how could this happen, how could there be such pain and strife in the world? You know what I mean? And I think
I know exactly what you mean, because it's like that's the other thing too, is like hearing about this in such little detail like lends more to the gravitas of it, because we're talking about like the flooding of a world. That's like an out of world cataclysmic event type thing that is,
it's unfathomable. Yeah,
exactly. Could you imagine if like we got a cutscene showing exactly, that kind of would have been buns.
We'll talk about it a little bit more, but he transforms into the puppet Ganon, so we got to talk about that first. Which is a goofy, I would say it's creepy when he's like transforming in the bed, but then it's like a goofy look. Kind of a goofy boss, IMO.
I was gonna ask you about that. I think the fight itself, I think all of the phases are pretty fun. I actually really like the boss fight, and I especially love the setting of it. Like the huge, like shallow water, and the way that the different phases, I think, are a lot of fun. And I think
this is unique too.
Yeah, I think this is probably the best example in the whole dungeon of like actually testing what you've learned, because you got to use a bunch of different items in each of the phases. But I also kind of agree, like you see his body transforming into this weird monstrous thing, and then it pulls back the curtain and it's like this weird shaking puppet. I was always kind of like, what is this?
It looks like I feel like they're like early 3D games where like the characters were made out of like balls.
This looks like something. Is there
a game called Balls or something like that?
This looks like something directly out of Legend of Zelda Battle Quest.
yeah, he's a little toy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, the fight itself, is pretty fun. I always found the like first phase like kind of annoying. But it's actually, the fight is actually kind of challenging, I think.
It is, yeah.
It's not like, I don't think I ever ran out of hearts during it or anything, or like got close to it, but just, it took me longer than all the other bosses I crushed,
Yep. I think I actually did start to I was running out of hearts. I think I had to use a fairy. The first phase is okay. The spider phase, where you have to use the reflection of the water to see where
that's cool.
The glowing orb is, that's awesome. That's a lot of fun. And then
we'll see that come back.
I think the last phase, the Moldorm phase, is probably the one that gives people the most trouble.
That one is a pain in the butt, actually.
It is a pain.
Especially if you don't, I think some of the solutions that make it easier, like you wouldn't normally think of, or they're like kind of hard to like stumble onto, I think, you know what I mean?
Yep. Well, I do like that, because it's like it's almost reminiscent of some like just older bosses in the series, like something like A Link to the Past, where it's like you have all these items, just throw something at it and see what works. And there are, you could just stand as far away as you want and try to snipe the tail, or you can like throw bombs at his face and get him to slow down and then go and hit the tail,
When I think back to I think of the first time I ever did that one and the first phase, though the first phase is still, I think, a little tricky no matter what. Maybe that's just me. But both of them, this is one of those types of situations where I always flash back to like my early times doing it and thinking of how frustrated I was. But now when I do it, like, because I know what to do. Like, I think knowing those tricks, especially if you're not super powered up, though I did have like a bajillion arrows and everything, I wasn't really in trouble. It makes it like a fun challenge. So I'm like, I kind of forgive it, you know, even though I have the early childhood memories of thinking it's the most annoying boss fight of all time. But after you beat it, Ganondorf, he's up in the rafters. He's like, meet me outside.
Let's take this outside.
And then this is a weird segment where you gotta like climb up the rope onto the roof. It's kind of cool, but I don't know.
I like it. I mean, it definitely takes a long time, but I really like it because it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's just like you're climbing up ropes that are absurdly longer than any rope you've climbed in the game. And something that I also really like is it's dead silent. There's no music playing. There's nothing going on. And it's just like, you know that Ganondorf just took Zelda outside. And I feel like this is really the Ascent lead up thing. This is the most effective example of that in this dungeon for me. It's not in like a big rising action, exciting relating to a climax thing. It's more of like a scary, eerie, like silent, you have way too much time to think thing as you're climbing up to what's inevitably going to be the final showdown, you know?
All I'm thinking is, I hope I don't fall off this thing.
I tried to swing on the rope to see if I could swing really far. It didn't work. It's too long.
Oh. There's something about, I don't know. I think I do agree with your assessment there. There's just something strange about it. I think it's when you go outside and then all of a sudden you're just on the roof. Like there's something about this dungeon, both the exit and the entrance, where I'm like, it doesn't feel like the place itself doesn't feel like a real place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I totally
It feels like
agree.
a place you go to watch the ending of the game, which is really good. But like,
yeah,
I think of it.
It feels disconnected. It feels disjointed. That's the word.
Yes, and that's where. So, I'm sort of bringing in. That's where I was thinking of the Ocarina of Time comparisons, because, like, they do it. They approach things differently, but I think of like the whole ascent and then descent of it, like at least like the getting to all the big moments, like even tying into the story, like it all feels like it all flows together, I think, really good. Whereas there's cool parts in here, like cool individual parts, but it's I'm thinking of more just from the dungeon aspect right now, because I think story aside, the story ties into it, but just like the cohesion of it all feels strange. You know what I mean? It feels more of like random little bits of things I like, but not what makes it good for me is not that it's like a dungeon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard to describe.
Fair. No, I know what you mean. It definitely does feel, that's something I didn't really consider, which I probably should have. So maybe I'll have to, once we get to the ranking, maybe in the future I'll look back at it, but you're right. It does, the Ocarina of Time Ganon's Castle at least does, everything leads into itself very naturally, and it feels like you're in this big castle and everything is leading into itself the way it should. It's probably just, childhood bias coming in. I think there is a charm to that for me, because it's like, everything feels a little weird, a little off.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when you first go in, the theme is like the very familiar Ganon's theme, but there's really weird like droning. It's like
it builds up too, right? Which they do. Don't they do that in Ocarina of Time? Also, well, you hear the organ louder, but that's a cool thing they like to do.
This feels less like a typical version of that, and it feels like a more bizarre, almost surreal, like maybe it was intentional, because you are in like a sunken, abandoned kingdom, so maybe they're trying to make you feel like everything's a little bit off, maybe. I don't know.
Part of me thinks, I just get the sense that they, like, didn't, that, I don't know, they didn't want to make a whole thing for Ganon's tower, since you're not spending a lot of time down there. So it's like,
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm still stuck on the fact that it's, like, off in the distance. And then you're all of a sudden on top of it.
Yeah, and then you're there.
I don't know, I guess you're right. Like, yeah, maybe it's, like, because it's buried, you have to go in a cave. I think I can see that, like, but it just doesn't come across to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it.
No, I know.
I get the idea though. But I want to say though, the story of the game and like this finale, I think is really awesome. Like, even though, you know, like I said, you're on the roof. This is the dialogue that we wanted to get to with Ganondorf, where this is where I think people really overcorrect, because and I think it's more due to the fact that people just wanted to, well, first it starts from like, there's some people who look at it from, there's only the bad guys and the good guys. Then there's people who are like, I don't know, there's the ambiguity, like the gray characters. And I think even that's a little bit overplayed. But here we have basically Ganondorf telling not really his backstory, but he just kind of is reminiscing. That's what I like about it. He's reminiscing on like a small, like an aspect of his life, but he doesn't go through like all his motives and intentions, you know, but he discusses what it was like, you know, being in the desert and how, you know, it was a hard life living in the desert, and the sun would scorch the land, you know what I mean? And he always got this breath of hope that always would draft in from Hyrule, essentially. He said it better than me, but you know what I mean? He sort of, he says, I coveted those wins from Hyrule. And you sort of get the idea of like him, he wants to, like, I think that's where people then make the leap to like, well, he wanted to conquer it to make a better life for his people or whatever.
Yeah,
it's
well,
like,
It's
not really, I mean, that's jumping 2 steps ahead. You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
I think, that is a little, like, people take that and see it as like a display of something you're supposed to be empathetic to. And I do think that is the case to an extent, but it's not like, he's not like an anti-hero. I don't think they're trying to paint him as like he had good intentions, really. It's not like this is good guy Ganon off on his own hero story.
Yes, but that's how I read it too, yeah.
To be fair, though, I also think, and this is like one of my favorite cutscenes in the whole series. I think this is like unparalleled dialogue.
Yes.
There are only a handful that maybe rival it for me. And I do think it's super refreshing, because it goes back to what we were saying before about like the intentional ambiguity and like leaving the gaps. It gives you just enough to know that clearly he was suffering and he was not happy with the way that his life was going, or the way that his situation, and the specific wording of like, like you said, the winds of hope from Hyrule, I coveted that wind, I suppose. It's not like, it's subtle hints at like almost like a desperation or a jealousy or something. But it doesn't then keep elaborating on that. It gives you just enough to be like, oh, this guy clearly has like feelings about things, and it kind of gives you a space, it gives you a perspective to be like, okay, I could see why it would lead to this, like, this power lust, you know?
Right.
Which I think is really cool, especially in the Zelda series, because, to be honest, as much as I love a lot of the villains we get, not a lot of them are overly complex. And even compared to other iterations of Ganondorf in the series, like, if you look at Ocarina of Time, which he's amazing in, and Twilight Princess, which I also think he's amazing in, both of those are just kind of like, I'm the big bad guy, and I'm evil, so I'm going to take over the world. That's a little reductive, but compared to this, it's like those feel a little bit more like classic villain tropes, and this, especially for its time, I think, and in a game like The Wind Waker, it's like, whoa, that's kind of cool.
Yes, it's the suggestion at the nuance, or like there is the nuance, but yeah, I feel like this is like they present them like it feels like this is still like the Ganon Dorf, the Ganon, you know, that we know, but he's shaded differently. You know, we're just like, I think it's more of like you just don't expect to see that sort of side of him, and it shines through for a moment, and that's what's so effective about it, you know.
Yeah. Well, and I love too, like everyone knows I'm a huge like lore nerd when it comes to Zelda and stuff, and like thinking about the lore implications of like what's happened between now and the last time that we've seen Ganondorf in action. You have Ocarina of Time Ganondorf, who's like this, I don't know, let's say like this power hungry, politically ambitious, I guess, because he's like trying to trick the king and stuff. He just wants power, you know, reasonably younger, and just kind of a big bad guy, right? And then he's been sealed for God knows how long, and it's like that rage, you can't, it's just interesting to see how it's transformed into this version of Ganondorf.
Yeah,
it's almost
it makes sense.
It's almost like you can't sit being extremely mad for hundreds of years. That rage had to have transformed into something like even deeper, like this resentment of the gods that we see, you know, in this final cutscene and in this final sequence.
Well, and you can see it, like, that's why it's like when people are like, they take it too far sometimes, because I think his final thing here, it is a desperate thing, as you said, is he wants to gather the Triforce he wants to essentially raise this land that he coveted, you know, that he wanted control of, that is completely dead now. No one lives there except for like one ghost. He wants to raise that again from the sea, which I assume would kill like everyone else, right? If just like everything else rose out of the sea like all of a sudden, and I'm assuming that would re-destroy the land.
He literally just wants it just to have control of it.
So that's his goal. But then we get this, I love this last minute swipe from the King of Red Lions. Or
Coral showing up out of nowhere again. That guy just loves to do that.
But it's awesome because he lays his hands on the Triforce. So he's kind of like, psych, I did it. And he wishes. So this is the two things, the two things in opposition here is, and he paints himself later. I guess we can kind of talk about that, but he kind of paints himself as a counterpart to Ganondorf in that, they were both trying to hang on to this dead kingdom, but he understands here that we can't undo this. Like, we'll kill everyone else. These people need to move on. He says, live for the future, Yeah. And so
it's time to move on.
And you get the Farewell Hyrule King song too. He's kind of remorseful, Again, it's not like I said, we didn't get this super deep backstory with this character, but the game implies as much, you just feel it.
Yep.
It makes you feel bad. He's like, sorry, the world sucks. This is the best we could do. Forgive us. He's like, it's a bummer. But I don't know. Sorry, what were you going to say?
This is jumping ahead slightly.
Yeah, we'll talk about the fight, but
why don't we talk about the fight first, actually? I'll put a pin in it.
He makes this wish. Basically, his wish is, for these kids to go on and live their lives, and get rid of Hyrule. This is before the fight. And this is where you really see, like, Ganondorf is officially, because he's already extremely desperate. He's lost it. And I love when he just starts laughing as the water starts to pour down.
It's just like his whole thing that he's been waiting for. Like it's all gone. Everything's done. The water's crashing down around him. Hyrule's gonna be lost forever. And he's like, he just loses it.
So then you have this fight with him where it's awesome. Well, actually, where he sheathes the swords and you just know, like, oh man, it's go time.
Yeah.
And I like this fight. It's sort of like, it's like a hand-to-hand sword fight with Ganondorf. He's pretty imposing, I feel like. It's not too tough, but I can't, you can take a lot of damage if you're prepared at this point, but
yeah.
It's really the parry is kind of the MVP of the fight.
For sure. They definitely utilize, that's kind of the main way you're supposed to like get damage on them. But it's cool because like there are parts of the fight that are like intentionally choreographed in a certain way, like the section where like Zelda's knocked out for a while and it's like you can't really do much. And I also like that his attacks are kind of like he's programmed to like block you at a certain point and just like immediately counterattack you, which makes him feel a lot more dangerous than he is, which is kind of cool. But yeah, like overall it's just super epic and a lot of fun.
The music is awesome.
Yeah.
And then I like, we didn't really talk about Zelda here, but she has some nice little moments, where she, what'd she say? Like, sorry, I overslept or whatever. These cute little one-liners. It kind of
feels for the first time like we're seeing Tetra come through Zelda. For me.
Yeah.
Like when she comes up and she's like having her little one-liners and stuff, I'm like, yeah, this is the cool.
Well, to give the game some credit, it's like she turns into Zelda and then like we don't really see her much after that.
Yeah.
Like there's not new scenes. So like it's not like, it's strange when she does, I think, like the way they completely change her, but like then like the next time you talk to her, it's like, oh, she's fun. She's still fun.
She's fun.
She's not she's like Tetra is still there, basically.
Yeah.
They didn't like wipe her brain or anything.
Yeah.
And it's cool, just like I love there's like artwork with this, but it captures the vibe so well, like of the two of them fighting together against Ganondorf. I think is a really nice touch.
It's like the two little kids of the future just like fighting side by side this big scary bad guy, and it's really cool.
They really actually sell you on how the feeling and the power of like gathering the holders of all pieces of the Triforce together beforehand, and it sells that as a moment. I think mainly because it is more than just like a little glowy thing on your hands, maybe because he summons it or whatever.
Yep.
Which is I don't know. It is funny actually. I was talking about like, how I like how kind of more subtle, ambiguous some of it is, like not showing you things, but then there's just this element of the Triforce just like sitting there, and it's like, hey, the Triforce. You don't often really see it in games, except for another game I praise this for, but in A Link to the Past at the end, you just straight up talk to the Triforce. So like maybe it's not as
I am the essence of the Triforce.
Maybe it's not as unknowable as I made it out to be, but
well, I do think it's cool because like like you were saying, the Triforce even up to this point has always just been like talked about as, we know it grants wishes, but we've never really known like how that process works. Like even in A Link to the Past, it's like The Triforce has its little like, hey, it's me, you can come touch me and fix things, and then it just cuts to all this stuff coming back and being good, right? And even in games prior, it's just like you only see people holding up the Triforce triumphantly. It's kind of scary and weird in a way to like when Ganondorf gets the Triforce, like he looks up to the sky and is literally talking to the gods. Like he addresses the gods like, gods hear that which I desire, or whatever. And then like the King of Hyrule does the same thing, and it's like it kind of really nails home that whole like, yeah, these three little Doritos, like there's some power behind this.
Yeah, we're trying to like get a message across to some people.
Yeah.
And who knows what they're thinking, or yeah. It's cool. Fight's good. The ending is awesome. You stab him right in the head.
Stab him in the head.
And
turns to stone. That's wild.
Yeah, that's where you get the scene where they're pleading for the King of Red Lions to come with them. It's pretty heartbreaking, I think.
Yeah. And this is one thing I wanted to say is that, you know, it's been like a running joke this season, sort of, that like Wind Waker kills it with the cutscenes. This is like superb cinematic, like everything up to like the framing of the shot, like him talking about the hope for a future Hyrule, like it rests in you, and it's just a zoomed in close up of these two little cherub children faces looking up at him, and it's like, oh my god.
The close ups on him are sweet too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, this is a great. And the thing that I wanted to put a pin in before that we were kind of talking about is this is something I picked up on this time that I haven't really picked up on before, and it's not like, it's kind of a jump to say, you know, the King of Red Lions has been like our guide and companion this whole time, so whatever bond that he and Link have had this whole time, it's not like explicitly hinted at or anything. But because it's the old King of Hyrule, this like ghost that was tied to this ancient kingdom and like basically the future of humanity, the future of, you know, this country or whatever. It feels a lot like ancestors talking to their descendants and being like, you know, my life wasn't perfect. We clearly didn't do things the right way. I'm sorry for giving you the world in the state that it's in, but, you know, you do the best with it. You do the best with what you have, and like the future remains in you. The future kind of goes towards you. And it feels a little bit like a passing on of the baton thing, and almost like, and bear with me here, it feels almost like a father talking to a son type thing.
Okay.
Of being like, you know, the sins of our fathers, right? Like, I messed up in my lifetime. All this stuff happened because I couldn't handle this, and I'm sorry for that, and now it's up to you. And the only reason I started thinking about that is because, going back to the development of this game, I believe this was the first game that Eiji Aonuma directed by himself, if I'm not mistaken. Because I think he had a big role in Majora's Mask. He was the one that wanted to like do that instead of the other Ocarina of Time project. And this was the next one where he got full reign. Right around this time in his life is when he had his son. Is when his son was born.
Oh,
so,
okay.
I think that's interesting to maybe think that, you know, Aonuma could have possibly been putting in those sort of themes of like generations passing on their sins and their accomplishments to their descendants. And it's just, I started thinking about that, and like, especially because knowing where this leads to in the timeline, it like everything's different from here on out.
Mhm.
It just, I don't know, it's just really cool to think of that and the implications of all this big story stuff, but also it for me in this most recent playthrough, it lent a little bit more weight to saying farewell to the king, especially when like Link is being brought back up in the bubble and he like reaches out to him, and the king like reaches up to him, and it's like, sorry, I can't come with you. You gotta move on. And it's like, dang, man.
What I thought of in terms of, and I think we could use E.G. Onuma as a reference here, is just that how different it is. Like all the Zelda games have been different in a lot of ways, but like how it feels like it stakes out like almost a new era for the series. You know what I mean? And it really mostly leads to art styles that affect like basically like some of the like not the lesser games, I guess, in like the public's perception, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like handheld games, stuff like that. But it does it
I mean, the business decisions of Nintendo don't really you know, it's not our fault that they then decided to use this and make a bunch of gimmicky like portable console games.
Yes. And I feel like I don't know, like I feel like that's actually something like that I feel like kind of, this is jumping ahead, but it's sort of a letdown for me a little bit, because it feels like it could almost be read as a statement, because the game is like the other games, and this is not a bad thing, but it's like at least the big tentpole ones kind of build off the other ones, and even the weirder spin-off ones are, you know, like, oh, this is a little remix of this one, but like Legend of Zelda to A Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time all have kind of this, we've kind of talked about it, how they sort of build off each other, and they kind of in certain ways retell the same story, but, you know, add a little bit to, like, you know, they modernize it each time, or like in the case of Ocarina of Time, bringing it into 3D, whereas this feels like, yes, they reference that Ocarina a lot, which is kind of at that point the tentpole of all those games. I think it's the biggest one, right? And yes, they retread certain elements there, but overall the game feels like there's a lot of it that's like, this is like, you just wouldn't compare it to those three like exactly, like especially with the sea and the sailing, you know, it's just totally different. It tonally, like, there obviously some of the gameplay is similar, but there's a lot of new like elements that it's like branching out from, and I almost just felt like at the end there it is like, yes, like, I don't know if that's intentional, but that's how I feel when I play it, where it's like, this is like something new, and like, it's like a meta statement on like the series moving forward. Now, what then, you know, for me it's a little, I get accused of dumping on Twilight Princess, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I just, not that I want to erase Twilight Princess from history, but I think it actually, now that I've gone back to this game multiple times over the past 5 to 10 years, where I am with it now, it bums me out that like there wasn't like I love Phantom Hourglass, and I like other games that you like. Minish Cap borrows from, you know, the Toon Link style you see in there, but like it bums me out that we didn't get like a real like follow-up to this, even with all the things that I like complained about throughout the game, like or throughout the series even, like I wish there could have been some iteration on this on like a console game, you know what I mean? Yeah, no, definitely. It's like, you know, if we would have gotten, it doesn't even have to be like a Wind Waker 2, but it's like they could have, I think, certain things about this game, they were a little too like reactive to or reactionary to, as opposed to like building off of some of the cool stuff. And, you know, this kind of goes back to one of the through lines that we've been talking about this whole season, about like some of the proto Breath of the Wild aspect stuff that was in here. We could have gotten
something like that even sooner if they had just, developed on this in a more meaningful way than 2DS games and the Minish Cap and stuff. And like, those are great games, and not to knock those games. Like,
that's what I mean. Is like they build on, they use the style, and they they exist in that world. They kind of continue the story.
It's mostly an aesthetic thing.
Yeah, I would have liked to see the game that was actually from a holistic perspective, like the follow up to this, and not to talk too much about Twilight Princess, but it feels a little bit of them going like two different. You know what I mean? Like there's unique, cool things in Twilight Princess. So I want to lay it out there. I'm not trying to dump on it that hard, but it does feel like them being like, oh, no. I don't know. I don't know for sure. That's just, I'm just kind of projecting that onto the game. I don't fully know, but that's what the vibe I get. I still think it makes it such a great story, and I think one of the best ones. It's one of my favorite ones of the games we've covered so far.
Yeah, and I mean, the last thing, because we got to talk about the very end, like the very, very end.
Oh, yeah.
But like one of the last lines the king says is, "I have scattered the seeds of the future," and it's like, he really did, though.
They go off. They tell him they're determined to find the new land that will be the next Hyrule. Yeah, and he's like, no. It won't be. Well, they do eventually call it Hyrule, but he says it'll be your
yeah,
land.
Right. No, it's going to be your land, and they name it New Hyrule.
I think maybe the Hyrule name is... No, that's what I mean. Like, that would have been awesome if the next major Zelda game, they're like, it takes place long after Wind Waker. Or they don't even say that, actually, because who cares about the timeline at this point? But they just say, here's the next game. It takes place in the kingdom of Labrina, but not, something new,
something
like,
different.
That'd been awesome.
Not New Hyrule.
Yeah, like that'd been sick if just like maybe they could have called it, named it after the king or something. I don't know. Because there's the credits, which I want to say it's nice when they float up and the pirates find them, and Errol's there and she's got a different outfit. That's cute.
Yeah.
And that's fun and all. Credits a little disappointing because think back. Man. Great, amazing song.
Oh, well, yeah, compared to,
Song is top tier, one of the best credits songs. Maybe the best we've had so far. But I'm thinking, we had a party at Lon Lon Ranch.
Yeah.
Everyone showed up,
I see what you're saying.
I don't know. I always find that fun. Like, it's okay that they don't do the exact same thing as Majora and A Link to the Past and all that stuff, but it is just like, hey, roll the credits,
Yeah.
I don't know what I would have wanted them to show, but I don't know.
I know what you mean, though, because it's kind of like, you think of like movies that do those in a different way, and I that's kind of my justification of it, is this feels more like they give you their own serious ending, and then it's like, that's it, now it's just time to, it's like the game's over, the story's done, just reminisce on it. As opposed to, like, you watch Shrek, and then at the end, they're all in the swamp singing together,
Yeah. Oh, that would have been awesome if they were
that is sick, but it's, like, time and a place,
Hyrule Idol, they're doing all the hottest songs from the early 2000s or whatever.
No, but that is those very last cutscenes, like, where the pirates pick you up, and it's doing this, like, expertly blended Pirates theme with Errol's theme.
Yes.
And it's like so really nice, and then it has the actual credits, and it's just showing like bubbles of all the characters you met along the way. And I don't remember if it's before that. No, it is after. I think it's after the credits, the post-credits scene, where you're getting that final, like, it's reminiscent of Link taking off of Outset the first time, but now he's got determination in his eyes, he's with the pirates, and now instead of him sadly waving back at his grandma, it's Errol waving to him from the beach. Like, it hits me, man. triumphantly like pans up to the sky and it's the end, and it's like they're gonna go find a new. They're gonna go find a ghost ship, and Tetra's gonna get captured.
She's gonna get turned to stone for a whole game.
Yep.
Spoiler. We're not there yet.
No, not yet.
We're not there yet. So we talked about the entire game, but we didn't rank the final dungeon yet.
Yeah.
So Corey, let's turn gears back to the dungeon real quick before we go. And where did you place Ganon's tower?
Okay, so looking at my ranking now, and it's like the way that we've done most of these dungeons and the way that we usually do it, at least the way that I usually do it, is I jump to other dungeons in the game to compare it to so I can get a benchmark of where I'm going to place it on the list. I didn't have to do that for this one because I do view final dungeons slightly differently, and it kind of already helps that I was already making direct comparisons back and forth to Ocarina of Time Ganon's Castle. So that was kind of my benchmark right there. Because I knew it was going to be around there. Because I don't really think as a dungeon it's super strong. And it kind of just became a question of, do I like Wind Waker Ganon's Tower or Ocarina of Time Ganon's Castle? And this is why I think maybe in the future I might have to reconsider it a little bit. But because you were saying of like the cohesiveness of it, but my initial reaction upon thinking about it, the element part of it where it's like going through puzzles with different themed rooms, I think Edge definitely goes to Ocarina of Time, but pretty much everything else I prefer Wind Waker for the most part. So pretty much for that reason I decided I wanted to go above Ganon's Castle Ocarina of Time. But then the next dungeon on my list is Swamp Palace, which I think is just a really cool dungeon, and I would rather play Swamp Palace than this dungeon. So I just ended up leaving it right there at number 33, right above Ganon's Castle Ocarina of Time.
Okay. So you might not like mine then, and it's like, it was weird because I thought about that after the fact, but like I did find myself comparing it to Ganon's Tower, or Ganon's Castle, I should say. But then I also, when I was thinking about it in terms of the game, I actually think it's my least favorite dungeon in the game. But
yeah, I mean, that's fair. It's my second least favorite.
And it's not, it's like, I kind of said why, like it is mainly the kind of the cohesion. I guess that's actually why I have Ganon's Tower way higher, or Castle way higher than it. I don't necessarily think that it should be way higher if I'm thinking about the difference. I mean, this is kind of a tight area of my list for sure, but I have it way above that. Well, I should say, so it's my least favorite in Wind Waker, because like the aspects I love about it are like, I do like some of those little gameplay things for sure, but it's really, we talked about before recording, like, do you factor like the final boss and like some of the story elements in? Because we do often, like, if a dungeon's got a cool story element, it'll factor in, and for me it's like those are there and those do help it for me, but what hurts it is that for me, it just it feels like they almost feel all random and like disconnected. Sure. And the dungeon itself feels to me like a better version of, like, say, the Black Tower or something, where it has this extra boss rush, but like then the Black Tower has like, it's obviously much smaller in scale, but then it's like a little navigational puzzle. You know what I mean? Like, and then like some enemies thrown in. It doesn't feel fully like a dungeon necessarily. Yeah, I mean, it does, but it doesn't. So yeah, just as a dungeon, I feel like, this is, like I said, it's weird to try and place it then on a list of dungeons. It's almost like apples and oranges, but I think I even have it below Forsaken Fortress, which I think, even though it's kind of it's like little and it's not a big thing, like, I think it's actually like unique and creative, like, as a dungeon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also even the story elements that you approach there feel like more baked into the dungeon itself. So it edges that out a little bit more.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I put it below that, and then I put it below Tail Cave because I was like, you know what, I like Tail Cave.
Tail Cave is cool.
So it's down at 40 on my list, but it doesn't take away.
I'm not mad at it. That's only 6 spots away from where I have it.
Oh really? And we've been
mine's at
surprisingly
34 or 33.
We've been surprisingly close actually. This
well, I think season. the main difference is just kind of like you take my placements of Ganon's Castle and Ganon's Tower, and for you, it's like bump Ganon's Tower down a little bit and bump Ganon's Castle up a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
You know?
For me, yeah, for going back to Ganon's Castle, I think my point then, and it's still how I feel now, is I think it's an all-around better, like, roller coaster. Like, it leads...
I know what you mean. I can see why... I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Okay. And that, we had to do a lot of math before we did this, but we calculated. You want to take a look. I don't know, how do you feel that your dungeon average, and so we've got the average, which is where we rank all of the dungeons based on their average placement. So it doesn't really factor in, it factors in like specific dungeon averages. And then the other score is the power score, where for every ranking, the dungeon gets points assigned to it. And so like a game like A Link to the Past, as you can see, dominates a lot just by, like, not just by, but like it helps that it has the most dungeons because it gets collectively more points. So do you feel like, we've kind of been tracking this, what do you think this says about how you feel about Wind Waker in the overall scheme of the series? Does it reflect how you feel about Wind Waker from a dungeon perspective?
I think so. I think it's kind of fair because it in both the average and the power, it slots in at number 4, which I think is kind of interesting. And it's, the average is not very far off from Link's Awakening and Ocarina of Time, but it's just like, I do think that's fair because I don't think I've ever really said Wind Waker has the best dungeons or anything. I think there are there's some cool stuff, but it's not one of the game's strong suits, I don't think. I'm more just interested to see like how these averages, because right now it feels like they're not changing that much, and I think that's still just kind of a side effect of the fact that we haven't covered like a lot of the dungeons in the series still. Like we've ranked a lot. We're at like 72 or something like that, and we still have a lot to go. And I'm interested to see how that affects these averages going forward, because I could even tell, and you said you could even tell when we were doing this math, like a lot of these are getting closer and closer, like way closer than they were before. Like for me right now, A Link to the Past and Oracle of Ages are literally 0.3 away in their averages. And then Ocarina of Time, Link's Awakening, and Wind Waker are all within a margin of like 2 points. So in the future, as we're adding more dungeons and the list is just getting expanded in both ways, I think it's just going to be interesting to see how some of those start to flip-flop and see if that still is reflective of my opinions of it. And Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link are just going to be sitting at the bottom the whole time.
Yeah, mine got closer to, I rounded on mine, so some became the same, but they're not exactly. Yeah. But like A Link to the Past and Ocarina are the same right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's still like, it's strange. I think maybe my Ocarina of Time opinion might be controversial, but otherwise, like, it's weird because when I think of that game, I'm like, oh, the dungeons are awesome. I gave it a 5, I think, in the definitive ranking. And that's why this isn't an exactly perfect metric, you know? But the thing, actually, the final thing I want to say about Wind Waker, because we were hinting at it and saying we were going to talk about it, is I think it's more of like, it feels like it's missing like one just crazy dungeon or something.
Yeah.
Like particularly, if you look at mine, it's like slotted alongside Majora's Mask, which is a one where I have the average super high, but it's just hurt because it's lacking some. And I think Wind Waker suffers from that a little bit in the power category, in that it's like,
yeah.
And then I think if they could have gotten, for me, if they could have just gotten one more banger in there, you know what I mean?
Sure, yeah. That might have rounded it out a little bit more. You can definitely feel either like they were short for time or they weren't able to fit. Like, I just want more. It would have been nice if they just had more dungeons.
Yeah, at least one, I think. At least one would have been good. And maybe I like the last one a little bit more. But, like, I think it might be... But then it also surprises me seeing because of how much I talked them up. Its average is above A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. So, I think... Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a couple things in Wind Waker that I'm like... You know, I wish they could have taken it a little bit further. And sometimes I'm like... That would have been, I think, like, that would have been okay if they just could have maybe gotten to do another one, you know? Like, follow up on it or something. It feels, or maybe I want them to do another one or wanted that or whatever, because I felt like they left something on the table. I don't know what it is, but...
Yeah, no, I agree.
I mean, something else... Sorry, go ahead.
Something else that, like, we're talking about how this kind of is a little... It shows a little bit how number of dungeons can affect our perception of... We're talking about whether we view this game has good dungeons, or this game has strong dungeons, or whatever. The averages and the dungeon power are only telling us certain aspects of that. And I think it would be interesting to see, like, we keep talking about this, but I think it would also be interesting to see, like... Maybe look at how far apart the highest and lowest dungeon from each game are on the list. Like, is it a difference? Is it a difference of 10 spots, or is it a difference of like 40 spots? Because then that also is something that I kind of think of in my mind. Is like, you know, if a game has a lot of dungeons and most of them are really good, and there are a couple that are really bad, I would still probably be like, okay, well, this game has really good dungeons overall. Whereas, like, if only a few of them are incredible and then the rest are mediocre, I might not say that game has awesome dungeons. You know what I mean?
You've done it. Next season, we're gonna add the dungeon differential. I don't know if that's actually a right term. The dungeon difference.
I like it.
Okay, and we will track that too. I'm sure people can do the math now if they want, if you can somehow figure out what our lists say. Yeah, because I know what you mean. Like, or sometimes you just think like, yeah, the numbers here, we can never get the numbers to say everything about how you feel about the dungeons in a game, but it's always fun to look at. So why not add another stat? That one will be easier to calculate.
Yeah.
Just the amount of spaces.
Just one difference.
Right? Yeah. Whoop. Well, the doggies are barking, and so I think that means we gotta get out of here. I mean, we talked about everything up front, so take a break, leave a comment, Q&A questions. Thanks again, everyone, for following along for this season. It's been sweet. It's been a lot of fun. Corey, thanks for committing and doing this, for the whole season.
Absolutely.
It's been great to have you.
Thanks for having me along for the ride.
So yeah, expect Minish Cap coming in the near future. It's gonna be different. We're not gonna give the story. Nothing against the story, but we're not gonna go into as much detail. It's gonna kind of feel. There's gonna be elements of previous Gooey's Dungeon Dive, I think, showing up, and it's gonna be a little bit more simplistic, which I think is fitting. We're going from this big epic game to this more quaint game about being a little guy. But yeah, I'm excited to get to Minish Cap and talk about it with you, Corey.